the amount of questions we received. I would like to start with a question received from Tim Turber. He is asking Dirk and Simon, what consideration has been given to the necessary engine warm-up times before departure? Also, for the maintenance and the troubleshooting in case of engine issues, these are easier or more convenient near the gate than opposed to near departure end of runway. So have you had any thoughts? Or I guess you definitely had some thoughts about this, but yeah, what are the results?
Yeah, exactly. We did have thoughts on this one before the trials. We had discussions with the airlines on how to do it. For instance, return before airbornes, things like that, and engine trouble. It would be a big problem, but we don't have a short-term solution for this problem. We actually know that it doesn't happen too often. So that makes it a little bit easier. Yeah, well, I'm not completely sure on what to say about this issue. We haven't solved it. We haven't encountered it at the moment. Issues with engine starts or technical issues at the runway, but we do see this problem indeed. Maybe Dirk wants to add up to this.
Oh, of course I will. Yeah. No, we've been thinking a lot about this. The thing is, usually before engine startup, the EGTs, everything has been checked. In fact, to be very honest with you, one of the first flights we had was a return before airborne flight with a technical issue after long storage. What we do see is it is a bit of the same, like that the Taxibot, the current Taxibot is still running on diesel. It's not perfect yet. We decided to start with kind of the happy flow in order to see what the percentage of flights is where we are able to, which we can be able to facilitate. In regards to the question about the necessary engine warm-up times, we took a very broad spectrum between 2 and 7 minutes, depending on whether it's a geared turbofan or engine type or whatsoever. So we were basically, we don't want to promise too promising results. We want to show the real picture. And up till now, we've had only one technical issue with an aircraft while taxibotting. But obviously, this is the case. In the general process as well. In a normal process, we also have return before airbornes. Sometimes we even have to tow an aircraft back to the stand or whatsoever. So it's not perfect yet, and we will have some issues with this. And yeah, it's inconvenient, but nothing more than that for now.
All right, thanks a lot for your response to this. Robin, here's a very intriguing question from Sofia Rivas Herrera. With the current crisis, many airports have shifted their priority of terminal expansion projects to improve their cash position and resilience in the upcoming years. Do you think this could be a driver or incentive towards focusing on sustainability, or rather a deterrent for it?
It's a fantastic question, Sophia. Thanks for asking it. And the question, by the way, is not just relevant for airports, but also for airlines and ground handlers, which is, as you're focusing on cash preservation and how do you master the crisis, can you really focus on something like sustainability? And I think what we're finding in more and more conversations is that, as the mindset shifts towards sustainability is actually core and important, not a nice to have, people embrace the crisis as a great catalyst for change, right? If you think about it, this is going to be the biggest catalyst, the biggest change we'll ever see in our industry in our lifetime. And so leadership teams around the world are thinking about, okay, how do we use this as kind of a reset moment to get rid of some of the things we don't like about the industry, to really implement some of the things we always wanted to, because we now have the opportunity. And I think you combine that with stimulus packages, which many of the airports, but also airlines are relying on. that have stipulations around you have to move to a more sustainable future, I do think this will really be a catalyst towards it, right? And so many airports we're talking to are saying, yeah, we're stopping certain activities right now. But as we're stopping, we're thinking about the next normal. And in the next normal, we need to be more sustainable. So we'll have to find a way to, do whatever we do in response to the crisis to make us come out of it stronger, right? And so that could be for airlines, retiring older fleets that are more fuel inefficient. It might be really thinking about ground processes at an airport and stepping back and say, okay, as the demand comes back, how do we organize ourselves to actually make it more sustainable to operate? And so, I'm personally very encouraged by many of the discussions around this, because it clearly seems that people have not put sustainability aside and said, look, we need to focus on the crisis and we cannot worry about the environment. It's almost more like, sustainability will be the next big crisis. And now that we've seen how bad crises are, we need to get ahead of it. And, COVID provides, as bad at everything as it is, it provides a canvas to really drive some change and change some of the processes.
All right. Thanks a lot, Robin. Okay, so let's continue. There was quite a lot of questions coming for the Taxibot. There's a very interesting question from Jacques Sol. What is Taxibot's performance during snow or ice and poor braking actions?
Oh, well, nice to have a question of you, Jacques. Good to hear you again, at least. It's an interesting question. In theory, adding weight to nose gear would lead to extra traction on your surface. So you could imagine that higher cornering speeds in slippery conditions or not perfect conditions of taxiways could prevail. Yeah, well, we haven't had these winters in the Netherlands for the last decade. So we're looking for ways in order to test this as well. Obviously, from common sense, you could say what I just did, but we still have to test it.
All right, thanks. Then maybe Chris, I think that goes into your direction. From Sophia again, the question: what would be the first steps towards digital transformation within airports to achieve operation optimization based on real-time data?
That's a great question. I think what's important is to show results. I think there have been a lot of programs and initiatives, innovation, digitization going on in a lot of airports and airlines. And I think many of them have been struggling to show concrete results. And I think also the process of innovation, should be probably more structured and rigid, because it's often associated with creativity and just doing and trying things, which is all true. But sort of the documenting, the reporting part is as important, because the only reason why you try is to generate the data that you can use to make decisions. And I'm pretty sure there's, I think even from the examples that I gave today, what I like about them is that there are already mechanisms, optimization mechanisms in place, but we just know that the input data is not as great. And I think it's important to go step by step. So find first the case that's most valuable to you, then start trying, working with more accurate data, more accurate predictions, and try to measure the outcomes. And I think both bottom up as top down, I think that's going to create the sort of enthusiasm and the conviction in these kind of things. I think a lot of senior leaders in the industry are people that did not grow up using iPads and apps and digital tools. So I think it's even more important that we show them exactly what's happening, because if you have a proper process in place and you generate the right kind of data, then nobody can dispute that.
All right, thanks, Chris. Simon and Dirk, I have two questions which are more or less related to each other. So I will ask them both, and then you can maybe answer consolidated onto these questions. The first one comes from Arjan van Vliet. does a legal base exist for autonomous operations on airsides? A possible option for future operations of Taxibot, I suppose. On public roads in Europe, this is a huge challenge. So we're here talking about the legal base for autonomous operations. And the second question is coming from an anonymous viewer. Pushback is part of the regulated activities regarding the European Regulation 96/67 EC. Which player will be in charge of the Taxibot pushback? One single ground handler for all the airlines, the different ground handlers for their customers, the airport, question mark. How do you manage this regarding the contract between ground handlers and airlines? And I think these are two very, very intriguing questions.
Yeah, those are indeed very intriguing questions. It's back to the basis of being an airport, I guess. And we are still the airport, not a ground handler. And it might be even an open invitation to talk about an APRA management service provider in maybe a next session. The thing is that the Taxibot operations as it is basically part of ground ops, which we have ground handlers for, but it's part of flight ops as well, which we have airlines for. So we're kind of stuck in the middle. The way that there should be a new way of thinking in these processes as well, and that I think that gaps the bridge towards Arjan's question, because we as an airport legally still cannot be a handler, so then we have to leave it open to the market. Although the system would be leading, so there it might not be beneficial to leave it up to multiple handlers. So that's where the APRA management service provider could come in, but obviously we're not sure yet. But this might be a possibility in the future. And regarding autonomy on airside, it's a very interesting question. The basis not yet exist. However, the times might be right to change. I think you pinpointed correct that on public roads it might be a very hard to get into Horizon 3 autonomy, but on airside it is a controlled environment. At least it's not as controlled as we might want to have it, but it's at least the start point could be good. And we already hosted a kickoff from our own ministry for EASA members on autonomy on airside. So this is basically for us something which we were working on. We formed a project group on this as well, but it's just the beginning of it. So this Taxibot proof of concept is the beginning of further steps into autonomy for us. So I think that might answer your question.
All right. Thanks a lot. We're still getting questions and they're all very, very interesting. So I would like to continue, but I can also understand if people have to drop off. So what I want to say is that in my opinion, we should continue. We will record, this webinar is recorded. So if you have to drop off, but you would like to get all the responses, we will share the link within the next days with you. So just in case that there is a time issue on your side. Then again, for the Taxibot, there's one very interesting question from Przemek. Thanks for being with us today again. It's great to have you on the webinar. It is a quite lengthy question, so I will read it, and Dirk, I guess you will then answer to it. So do you think this process will reduce runway throughput, increase overall taxi time, and reduce runway capacity due to this new process at Amsterdam with the Taxibot? Also, or maybe you can answer this one first, and then we go step by step.
Okay, let's do it like this. If I were an air traffic controller, this would be my main concern, I guess, about throughput, CDM, timing issues, and planning issues. Simultaneously on the proof of concept on Taxibot with a single Taxibot, obviously, we're working on a simulation, and the basis of this is the basic of our capacity planning as an airport on ground operations. So what we do is using the output of the Taxibot proof of concept in terms of throughput times. So we basically have timing missions. Actually, we just ended the timing missions maybe 30 minutes ago for today, where we measure the length of pushback, the length of the time it took until a pilot could be in charge of the airplane. So we know when we measure more than we used to do. We don't only have our thumbs up signal anymore, but being at the runway, the first results of the simulation show that actually runway capacity is still met. So yeah, that's a short question. I could make it very lengthy if you like, but maybe next time.
Yeah, continuing on Przemek's question, what is the target usage of the Taxibot on overall demand at Amsterdam? I imagine you cannot fulfill 100% demand each hour of the day.
Yeah, very good question. That depends whether we would have enough Taxibots available to foresee or to have all operations. The thing is, we have daily 17 runway combinations here in Amsterdam, so it's kind of hard to predict still whether it's feasible or not to Taxibot towards a certain runway combination. The planability issues that we do have there, that comes all back, I think, to the presentation of Chris as well before. So yeah, basically we're not sure yet how many Taxibots, for example, would be needed in order to facilitate a whole capacity, and what would be the need for. But yeah, more investigation is needed for this, and in the end of this year, we will present a feasibility study on the total, including answering this question.
Cool. Przemek, I will get back to the rest of your questions, but first maybe let's also ask something in between. Coming from Jacques Sol again, what is the aircraft insurer's opinion on the Taxibot? Pilot remains fully responsible for the aircraft movement, is that correct?
Yes, that is correct, and there was also a concern of the airlines before the trials here at Schiphol. But the fact is that Taxibot is certified by EASA and is also approved by the ILNT, our regulatory body. So if a thing like that happens, insurers don't care. It's just a part of an aircraft, as any part of the aircraft is. So any airline was able to use it without any restrictions, including leased aircraft. So it was actually no issue at all. In the current Taxibot phase, that is, and that's also because the pilot is in charge indeed. For the autonomous variant later in the next decade, yeah, that situation might be a little bit more complicated. So we have to solve it as it comes, I guess.
Okay, I guess it's like with the regulation, there's not yet 100% coverage of all these things.
Exactly.
Then from one of the anonymous entries, seeing the evolution of engine technology and electric aircraft being seen as the aircraft of the future, do you see these advancements in technology outweighing the efficiency provided from the Taxibot?
Shall I answer this one, Dirk? Okay. Well, to be honest, we don't, especially on the shorter term, we don't. What you see is that the airline industry, aircraft industry, is very slow in adapting things. So, for instance, it's an example we always mention. Boeing actually ramped up its Boeing 767 production a couple of months ago. It's a design from the mid-80s, and with new 767s being sold and flying the next 20-25 years, things will move very slowly and will remain to move slowly. So that's the first thing why we don't think this will be an immediate problem. Second thing is that also with electric or maybe hydrogen-powered aircraft, you will have huge advantage with the Taxibot, especially if you have it completely integrated in what we call Autonomy airport, because it will also increase your safety and capacity at the airport. And also, if you look at the very short term, if you're running your aircraft engines, you have problems with blast, for instance. And if you don't run your engines, yeah, you obviously don't have blast, which makes the airport safer in very short term. And even with electric engines or hydrogen-powered engines, that advantage will remain. And also with the batteries, we expect, especially at the beginning of this development, you will want to save as much fuel as you can on the ground anyway, in order to have a higher range of the aircraft in the future. So there are a lot of reasons why we are not too worried about this.
Okay. Yeah, I guess you're right that fully electric aircraft are probably another 20 to 30 years away, unfortunately. I would like to get back to Przemek and actually connect it with one of the questions coming from Jacques. It goes a little bit into the same direction. So first, from Przemek, did you look at taxi-in usage as well? What are the pros and cons? And Jacques is asking, the returning Taxibot, so without the aircraft, to the ramp will add to movements on taxiways and possibly runway crossings. How does this add up to increased safety? Runway incursions are still an issue at Schiphol.
Yes, and I would like to add another question from Arjen van Vliet. How can Schiphol be leading in the Taxibot to this question as well? Let me first start with the inbound, the taxi-in process. Yes, we have considered it, and yes, we also have done well, kind of a test with it to simulate how that would work, and that makes us leading in the Taxibot. It's all obviously a little bit a marketing thing, of course. Taxibot is used in India, in Delhi, and in Bangalore, the only locations where it's operational. But only outbound. So we have added some processes and developments to it for Schiphol's things like docking and the whole inbound process. So that is what it makes us leading in our eyes. But obviously you can argue about it as long as you want. Definitely taxi-in is considered. But the advantages are a little bit different than for taxi-out taxi-botting. For instance, because the taxi-out time is 14 minutes at Schiphol and the taxi-in time is 9 minutes, so way lower. And the longer the taxi time, the more benefits you have, obviously, with taxi-botting. So it is a case to make, but the processes are a little bit harder to implement, and the benefits are a little bit less than for outbound aircraft. So that's why we focus, just like many other airports, for the outbound processes. And then about return trips. In the beginning of the presentation, I talked a little bit about safety and capacity and how that is a very delicate balance. The return trips are one of the things I was implicitly say with that. We have a maximum ground movements at Schiphol, or well, not a real maximum, but we had a report for the Dutch Safety Board a couple of years ago, 2017, which stated that Schiphol cannot grow in terms of ground movements and flights without large changes. They quote unquote say without a future-proof operational concept that mitigates current and future operational risks. So that's a very interesting thing. And while the Dutch Safety Board told us that, we will add ground movements on the airport with the Taxibot. As mentioned, obviously the Taxibot need to return to the gate somehow. So we are focusing on putting the Taxibot on airside roads instead of taxiways as much as possible. But also one of the other problems is the infrastructure at Schiphol. It's very old. It's relatively old. It's small, so it's not very easy to get the Taxibots on roads everywhere. So this is actually one of the things I was talking about in my first slide, which if we scale up the Taxibot in the future, we'll certainly have problems with, and we need some very, very far-going measures to solve that problem. I hope I answered these questions good enough for now.
Yes, absolutely. Przemyk, if you don't mind, I would like to have the rest of the questions answered then offline via email by Dirk and Simon in order to move on. And also, it's really great to see that there are still questions coming in, but watching the time, I would like everyone, if you have questions, Piotr, can you please go to the next slide? You can directly ask them to the panelists. You see the contact details here. So what I will do is I will finish with the last 3 remaining questions. One is coming from Vivekanandan. How do the panelists see the impact on airport planning? And I think that's a very interesting thing that is also going into the direction of Schiphol, but also Robin into your direction. For instance, when one is designing Greenfield Airport and how to incorporate this, will this be part of Annex 14? How does this influence airport airside expansion plans?
Go ahead, Dirk. If you want to start off, I can add some stuff.
Yeah, I was giving you the same opportunity. Now from Schiphol perspective, it is eventually it is our main goal. This is something to think about after the session as well, I guess, for all participants, to link the runway planning from one side towards the gate planning from our side. So if you talk in terms of airside planning and ramp planning, it is our main goal and main concern to have these incorporated into each other and to see what the field in between would do. So the planning is actually the basis of a system moving forward into autonomy, because the way it works now, like Simon already mentioned, we still have a lot of questions and challenges to face between now and 2030 in order to scale up the process. And yeah, planning and routing in these terms will be preconditional in order to achieve our goals. So that's from our side at Schiphol.
Okay. Honestly, I think this question was also more related to the actual airport layout. So sorry, Robin, I was actually
no, I mean, it is an interesting question, right? Because I think there's the layout question, how do you deal with runways, etc. There's also a real question about how you think about stakeholder engagement, right? And so we've talked about different different authorities, whether it's the taxiways for ATC or the ramp for a different ramp group, whether it's the ground handlers, etc. And I think as we're building airports, we have to think much more about how do we facilitate stakeholder engagement and collaboration, right? So I'll give you a simple example that the ASIA team will know well about, is that how do you get access to some of the data that is part of the infrastructure, right? So every gate has 4 or 5 cameras pointing at it, and yet that data that comes of those cameras is very hard to harness for many of the players, and it would be very helpful, right? And so I think as we think about infrastructure and sustainability more broadly, we'll need to make sure that we actually foster collaboration, as part of infrastructure and as part of planning.
Yeah, and if I may be so free to add on this is exactly the point that we have here in Amsterdam. The way of working together in Europe is already different, and in North America, with apron control having a different role than we have it here. It's kind of the same, but at the same time totally different aspects. So you have to look for tailor-made solutions for each airport. But I think this collaboration is key in all aspects for each airport and, well, for the whole sector basically.
Yep, amen to these 2 statements. Okay, then last but not least, these 2 last questions go again to you, Dirk and Simon, and maybe you can give some brief answers to them. They're not 100% related, but just to save some time, I would like to connect them. One question that is coming is, how is the energy for charging the Taxibots produced? Is it clean energy? If this solution were to be scalable in other airports around the world, how can we ensure the decrease in CO2 emissions from energy production? So it is about charging and how on a scaled level the CO2 reductions can actually be achieved. And the second one is about operations, coming from Ole. Still wondering how you convince the ground handler to take part in your testings and developments. Where is the lever for them as needed capacity is increasing for drivers and equipment? Can you share some of your discussions with them?
Yeah, certainly. I can give a short answer to both of these questions. First of all, about the energy need. I think it's good to understand that the Taxibot at the moment is diesel electric. So we put diesel in there, and although it's almost biodiesel, it still is diesel. So that's the first one. We are obviously looking towards a development in for instance, charging electricity with batteries on board, or hydrogen power the Taxibot in the future. And then this is a big problem. Schiphol has 100% clean energy. We have our own windmills somewhere in the country. And that's great, but the point is, for the longer term, is it enough? Do we have enough power to power all these Taxibots? It's actually something we are investigating with our supplier at the moment. So a very interesting one. Yeah, and I think that will be something really interesting for the scaling up. We know that we probably will have enough electricity or clean electricity by 2028. So that's too long from now. So we have to think of ways to speed it up, to do it differently. And it will definitely be something that other airports will have to handle as well. So definitely an interesting question where we don't have a complete answer at the moment. The other question about the handlers, also a very good one. We still don't know how we made this happen. That's the honest question. Now we are working together with a small Dutch airline, Corendon Dutch Airlines, and because they are small and willing to participate in innovative projects, they are very eager and fast to do these kind of things. And airlines have a relation with the handlers, but the airports don't. So all the conversations we do with handlers go via the airline. So we asked Corendon to ask the NATA in this case to deliver some truck drivers for the test. And it took a while for them to agree with that, but they just continued asking the NATA for the drivers, and at the end it was okay. But it's just a trial, of course. The question is how to do this in the long term. So that's one thing. And the other one is that the COVID-19 crisis is obviously bad on a lot of parts, but it was very good for the staff availability. So we actually had more participating truck drivers and more participating handlers than we expected before the trials. And well, that's one of the very few good news things for this period. Dirk?
I may be so free to add some very short point on this. I was making this point about collaboration already previously, but I think the road that we took was to speak to each stakeholder in his or her own language. So we've been able to talk with ATC in a different way than we did with the pilots, in a different way than we did with ground handlers, in a different way than we did with our own colleagues. And in my personal opinion, this might have been the key in order to bring all stakeholders together for this project, at least.
All right. Perfect. Well, I'm super excited about this webinar because when you see the amount of questions, it is confirmation that this was definitely something worthwhile for people. I would like to just share a brief poll with you, just to get some feedback about this webinar. I thank everyone who participated today. I thank especially Robin, Dirk, and Simon for giving us their thoughts, and also for Christian for showing us. It was a pleasure. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you took a lot of information out of it. And if you have any further questions, as I said, you see the contact details here. For those of you who are interested in attending the next Reboot Aviation webinar, we will have a summer break in August, and then we will come back in September. And that time in September, we will focus more on the terminal side. So the last couple of webinars were more on the apron side and the airside operations. And then in September and October, we will have 2 webinars that are more focusing on the terminal side. So thank you, everyone. Have a nice rest of your day, or beginning of the day, depends on from where you are watching. And looking forward to see you again in September. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thanks for organizing, Jan Willem. Thanks, everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thanks all.